Chicago didn't ease into winter that night. It slammed into it. Snow came down thick and wet, turning the sidewalks along Wacker Drive into slick glass and making the wind off Lake Michigan feel personal. In front of a glass tower that looked like it had never known hardship, a pregnant woman stood with her coat pulled tight, breath turning to smoke, palms pressed to her belly as if she could shield her baby from what her husband had just done. Her name was Monique King, black, 30, soft-spoken in rooms that tried to talk over her, the kind of woman people underestimated because she didn't scream to prove she existed. 7 months pregnant, she had just walked out of a high-rise law office with divorce papers signed and filed, believing she was leaving with dignity. Darius King followed behind her like a man leaving a meeting, not a marriage. Black, late 30s, billionaire polished, sharp haircut, expensive watch, confidence so practiced it looked effortless. He didn't look at the snow. He didn't look at Monique. He looked through her, like she was already a memory. Inside that conference room minutes earlier, the air had smelled like lemon cleaner and cold money. The divorce packet sat between them like a slab, red tabs marking clauses that weren't meant for her comfort. Monique's attorney, Calvin Brooks, had tried to slow the pace, tried to explain what certain provisions meant. Darius cut him off with a calm that was crueler than shouting. "Just sign," Darius said, like he was telling a clerk to stamp a form. Monique signed anyway. She didn't sign because she was weak. She signed because she knew what kind of man Darius became when he felt challenged. Quiet sabotage, polished cruelty, punishment delivered with a smile. She chose the signature because sometimes the safest move is to step back and let a reckless person think they've won. The ink wasn't even dry before Darius stood up and slid his coat on. No apology. No goodbye. No glance at the baby that shifted beneath Monique's sweater. Outside, the black SUV was already waiting at the curb, engine running, warm leather inside. The driver opened the rear door for Darius like the world understood hierarchy. Monique stopped short. "Where are you going?" Darius turned just enough for her to see the satisfaction in his face. Not joy, not relief. Satisfaction. The look of a man who believes the future belongs to him alone. "To my life," he said. "You've been borrowing it." His eyes dropped to her stomach like it was an inconvenient detail on a bill. Then he delivered the line that would echo later, the kind of line cruel people repeat because they think it makes them untouchable. "You'll be fine," Darius said. "You always are." Then he stepped into the SUV and shut the door. The tires hissed on slush. The vehicle pulled off into the snowfall, disappearing between headlights and glass buildings, leaving Monique standing on the curb in the kind of cold that steals dignity as fast as it steals feeling from your fingers. Calvin hurried to her side, his breath sharp. "Monique, do you have somewhere safe tonight?" She did, at least on paper. A Gold Coast condo with her name on the mailbox, her coat in the closet, prenatal vitamins on the bathroom counter, and a nursery corner she'd been building in quiet hope. She started to answer when her phone buzzed inside her purse, vibrating like a warning. She pulled it out with stiff fingers. A single alert lit the screen. "Building access update. Your credentials have been revoked." For a moment, she didn't move. She just stared as the meaning crawled under her skin. Revoked. Not delayed. Not reviewed. Revoked. Calvin leaned in, reading over her shoulder. His voice dropped. "When did this come in?" The timestamp was recent, hours ago, right after the signature, right after Darius walked out with that satisfied smile. Then another notification slid in, quiet and final. "Property management notice. Access level changed. Please contact your account holder." Account holder. Those two words weren't just bureaucracy. They were a message. Darius had reached into her life and flipped a switch, the same way he flipped everything, without raising his voice, without leaving fingerprints, without caring who froze in the aftermath. And as Monique stood there in the snow outside a building that no longer recognized her, a photo message popped up. No warning, no mercy. Darius, dressed in black, under a chandelier, a woman pressed against his side, her hand flat on his chest like she owned the future. Behind them, a white dress bag hung on a door. 3 words appeared beneath the photo. Tomorrow. Don't show. Monique didn't cry yet, but something colder than the weather settled into her bones, because she finally understood the divorce wasn't the end. It was the lock, and Darius had just turned the key from the inside. The first cruel trick in stories like this is that the world keeps looking normal while your life is being erased. A few miles north, the Gold Coast still glowed the way it always did. Streetlights rinsing the snow in warm yellow, lobby windows shining like aquariums, valet men stamping their boots and laughing under the awning as if they'd never heard the word eviction in their lives. People hurried past with shopping bags and scarves, stepping around slush with the practiced ease of Chicago winter survivors. Monique arrived with Calvin beside her, and for half a second she let herself believe the alert on her phone had to be a mistake. She lived there. Her deliveries came there. Her mail came there. The doorman knew her face. The elevator mirrors had watched her body change month by month. She reached the revolving door and pushed through, and the heat inside hit her cheeks so hard it almost felt like mercy. The lobby smelled like cedar and fresh flowers. Marble floors shone under recessed lights. A fountain made the kind of gentle sound rich buildings used to pretend they're peaceful. Behind the concierge desk stood Marcus, the same man who used to greet her by name, ask how she was feeling, remind her to stay warm out there. Tonight, he didn't smile. His eyes flicked to her, then dropped quickly to the tablet in front of him. That tiny movement, down and away, was the first sign that something had already been decided without her. Monique walked to the turnstile with her key fob in her hand. It was a plain black square with a silver edge, the kind of object you never think about until it becomes a border. She tapped it once. A red light blinked. She tapped again, slower, like patience might persuade electronics. Red again. A soft beep followed, polite and final, as if the building was apologizing while it locked the door. Marcus came around the desk quickly, lowering his voice. "Mrs. King, I'm sorry. Try it again," Monique said, not pleading, just testing reality. Marcus didn't reach for the fob. He didn't need to. "Your credentials aren't active." Calvin stepped forward. "Who deactivated them?" Marcus's mouth tightened. He glanced up toward the small black domes in the corners of the ceiling, cameras that never blinked. He looked like a man standing in the shadow of someone else's power. "There was an update," he said carefully. "A few hours ago." A few hours ago meant right after the papers. Right after Darius walked out with that satisfied calm. Right after he got what he wanted. A security guard approached, broad-shouldered, earpiece, measured steps. His name tag read Leon. He didn't look at Monique first. He looked at the turnstile. He looked at the red light. Then he looked at Calvin, the way authority always looks at whoever it believes it should answer to. "Is there a problem?" Leon asked. Calvin's voice stayed controlled. "She's a resident." Leon didn't argue. He didn't have to. He spoke like a policy manual. "Ma'am, you're not on the active list." Active list. Those 2 words were a public slap dressed as procedure. In that moment, Monique wasn't a wife or a mother-to-be. She was a name that had been moved into a different column. A woman in a fur-lined hood walked toward the elevators, slowed when she recognized Monique, then kept going without speaking. A valet outside glanced through the glass, then turned his head away. Witnesses everywhere, quiet, careful witnesses, people who didn't want the shame of the moment to splash onto their own shoes. Monique's phone vibrated again. Another alert. Another system agreeing with the first. "Building access update. Your credentials have been revoked." Then a second line appeared underneath, colder because it sounded official. "Please contact your account holder." Account holder. The phrase landed like a verdict. It wasn't just that she couldn't get upstairs. It was that the building was saying, in corporate language, that she belonged to someone else's permission. Monique didn't cry. Not yet. She did something sharper. She opened her phone, took screenshots of every notice, every timestamp, every line of text. She created a folder and titled it with one word that made Calvin's jaw tighten when he saw it. Receipts. Leon shifted his weight, watching her, still calm, still assuming she would beg or break. Marcus stood beside the desk, hands clasped, a polite hostage to whoever had made the call. Then Monique's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered, and a woman's voice slid through, smooth like she'd practiced sounding kind. Monique, the voice said. Don't make this messy. Darius asked me to handle it. Monique's eyes lifted slowly toward the cameras, as if she wanted whoever was watching to hear every syllable. The woman chuckled softly. It's snowing, right? You're probably out there looking dramatic. Please don't show up tomorrow. Tomorrow where? Monique asked, calm enough to be frightening. The woman paused just long enough to let the cruelty smile. The wedding. And then she added, like she was repeating a line Darius had taught her. You'll be fine. You always are. Monique ended the call without replying. No argument. No threats. Just silence. Because the moment she hung up, another notification lit her screen, an email from property management, marked urgent. Attached was a scanned request form. And at the bottom, in Darius King's signature, was the reason the red light had blinked. The scanned request form didn't look dramatic at first glance. It looked like every other piece of paperwork rich people use to make cruelty feel professional. A clean header, a few check boxes, a polite subject line that pretended nobody would get hurt. But the attachment carried a timestamp that matched the moment Darius walked out of the law office. And at the bottom, in a signature that was bold and careless the way power gets when it thinks it can't be challenged, was his name. Darius King. Monique stared at it in the lobby's warm light, as if the marble floors might suddenly crack and admit what that signature really meant. It meant he didn't just leave her. He built a process to erase her, fast, quiet, and official. Calvin leaned in, reading over her shoulder, then looked up at Marcus behind the concierge desk. Marcus still had that tight, apologetic posture. The posture of a man who didn't want to be the villain but had decided he would rather keep his job than do what was right. Marcus, Calvin said, calm but sharpened, who received this request? Marcus swallowed. Property management. Name. Marcus hesitated. In that hesitation, the lobby changed. Two people waiting near the elevators stopped pretending not to listen. A couple came in from the snow, shook off their coats, then slowed when they saw Monique standing at the dead turnstile. A valet outside glanced through the glass and quickly turned his head away like shame was contagious. Marcus finally spoke. Kendra Sloan. Calvin nodded once, then looked at Monique. We're going to document everything. Monique didn't answer. She didn't have the kind of panic Darius was counting on. What she had was quieter, an unnerving stillness, the kind that shows up when someone has been pushed too far and stops pleading for basic decency. She opened her phone and saved the form into the same folder she'd already made. Receipts. Then she took a photo of the screen with her other hand so there would be no system error, excuse later, no sudden missing attachment, no deleted thread. She forwarded it to Calvin and then to herself. She checked the timestamp twice. Pain has a way of getting specific when you're cold. Snow melting down her collar. The ache in her ankles from standing too long. The baby shifting as if unsettled by the tension in the air. The sound of the fountain in the lobby bubbling like nothing mattered. Calvin spoke again. We can file an emergency motion tonight. At minimum, I can get you into a hotel. Monique finally looked up. He wanted this to happen in public. Calvin didn't disagree, because the scene was already forming around them. Quiet spectators, polite staff, cameras overhead. A humiliation with witnesses. A rich building's version of a public square. Leon, the security guard, shifted closer, hands clasped in front of him, professional and unmoved. Ma'am, if you're not on the active list, you can't remain past the visitor area. Visitor area. The phrase was small, but it landed like a punch. Monique held Calvin's gaze and didn't blink. Let's go. They walked out through the revolving doors into the snow, and the wind hit them like a punishment. For half a block, Monique could feel eyes on her back. People watching without helping, the way crowds do when they sense a downfall unfolding. A man near the valet stand lifted his phone for a second too long, pretending to text, but the camera lens was pointed straight at her. Bloodless destruction always starts like this, not with violence, but with permission. Calvin guided her toward his car, but before she got in, her phone buzzed again. A text from Darius. 3 words, like he'd stamped them into her life. "You'll be fine." Then a second message followed immediately, colder. "Don't embarrass yourself tomorrow." Tomorrow. The wedding. The chandelier photo. The mistress's voice on the phone. Monique didn't respond. Silence was the only thing she could control right now, and she used it like a weapon. Calvin started the engine, wipers fighting the snow. He made one call, then another, his voice low and clipped. "Kendra Sloan. Yeah, property management at the Gold Coast Tower. I need the basis for an access revocation right now." A pause. A polite answer on the other end. The kind of polite answer that hides a lie. Calvin's jaw tightened. "So you're saying Darius claimed there was a safety issue?" Monique turned her head slowly. That was the new layer of cruelty, not just locking her out, but painting her as a problem that needed to be controlled. Calvin ended the call and exhaled through his nose. He filed it as an emergency domestic concern. That's how they move this fast. Moral complexity without sympathy. Darius wasn't just cruel, he was strategic. He was protecting his image for tomorrow, protecting his mistress from questions, protecting his perfect billionaire story from the sight of a pregnant wife at the door. Calvin reached back into his briefcase and pulled out a thin copy of the divorce packet. He flipped to a tabbed page, then stopped, eyes narrowing at a line most people wouldn't understand. He didn't say it out loud right away. He just stared, then looked at Monique as if seeing the board beneath the board. Because the clause Darius used to lock her out, the clause he was so smug about, had a problem. It referenced the wrong controlling entity. And that meant, somewhere in his rush to erase her before morning, Darius had signed his own name onto the first crack in his empire. By the time Calvin pulled into a hotel drop-off near Michigan Avenue, the snow had turned the city into a muted blur, streetlights haloed, tires hissing over slush, wind worrying at every corner like it had a grudge. Inside, the lobby was warm and bright in that careful way luxury places are warm and bright, as if comfort can be manufactured on schedule. A bellman rolled past with luggage. A couple in ski jackets laughed at the bar, and behind the front desk, a young clerk glanced up at Monique. Wet coat, tired eyes, hand resting on her belly, then quickly looked away like she didn't want to be part of what she was witnessing. That's the witness effect in real life. People see injustice, then pretend they didn't, because acknowledging it would require a choice. Calvin checked them in under his name and guided Monique toward a quiet seating area near a tall window. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and expensive perfume, and the kind of calm that only exists because someone is paid to maintain it. Calvin laid the divorce packet on the table like evidence and slid the page with the clause closer. "This is the part he thought would control you," he said. Monique didn't speak. She watched the paper the way you watch a snake, still, alert, refusing to flinch. The clause was written in clean legal language, the kind of language that sounds reasonable even when it's designed to trap somebody. It referenced the controlling entity responsible for assets, residences, access, and marital property, words meant to make a person feel small without ever insulting them directly. Calvin tapped a line with his pen. "Here. This is where he messed up." He paused, letting the silence do the work. That was strategic too. Silence makes people lean in. Silence makes a revelation feel heavier. "This clause doesn't list Darius as the controlling party," Calvin continued. "It lists a holding company, and the holding company isn't under his personal control." Monique's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" It means he's been moving like a king in a house he doesn't fully own. Calvin opened his laptop, fingers moving fast. He pulled up public filings, corporate registrations, property records, names, dates, addresses. Then he stopped at one document and stared hard, like his brain was double-checking what it thought it saw. A beneficial ownership filing. The controlling entity wasn't King Ventures, the name Darius used in interviews. It wasn't his personal trust. It wasn't even a company that matched the branding on his buildings. It was a quiet, old-sounding holding group with a Chicago-registered agent and a history that went back before Darius's billionaire glow-up. And attached to it, buried in a line most people would skim past, was a name Darius never expected to matter. Monique's name, not as spouse, not as dependent, not as resident, as an authorized party. Calvin didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He just nodded once, like a man watching a door crack open. "I'm going to make a few calls," he said. Monique's phone buzzed again. Another message from Darius, short, arrogant, rehearsed. "You're still doing the most. Go stay somewhere cheap." A minute later, another text popped up, this one from an unknown number. Tayana again, sweet and casual as if humiliation was a hobby. "Don't pull up tomorrow. It won't end well for you." Monique didn't reply. She added both numbers to the same folder. She added timestamps, screenshots. She renamed the folder to something even colder. Receipts, Snow Night. Across the city, Darius King was moving through a different kind of warmth. His penthouse overlooking the river was lit like a magazine spread. Candles on the counter, soft jazz humming through hidden speakers, a garment bag hanging from a closet door like a promise. Tayana floated through the space in silk pajamas, laughing at something on her phone, already acting like the place belonged to her. Darius stood in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, cufflinks on the island beside him, checking tomorrow's schedule like a CEO preparing for a merger. He thought he had managed the optics perfectly. Divorce today, wedding tomorrow, pregnant wife erased in between. He had even engineered the humiliation. Locked out in snow, access revoked. No chance to show up at the building and make him look bad. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and answered with the confidence of a man who expected good news. "Yeah." A calm voice came through. Professional. Neutral. A voice that didn't fear him. "Mr. King, this is compliance. We need to ask you a few questions regarding a flagged transaction pathway connected to one of your operating entities." Darius's smile didn't move, but his eyes sharpened. "Which entity?" The voice read it off like a fact, not a threat. Darius frowned. "That's not even." At the same time, his second phone buzzed with a different kind of notification. A luxury jeweler confirming an appointment for the morning. Then, right beneath it, an automated bank alert. Temporary hold. Account access under review. Darius stared at the screen as if staring could reverse it. And for the first time that night, the billionaire's posture changed, just slightly. Not collapse, not panic, but the first microbeat of shrinkage, the moment the room stops obeying you. Morning didn't bring relief. It brought exposure. Chicago woke up under a fresh layer of snow, and the city looked clean in the way rich neighborhoods always look clean, like trouble only happened somewhere else. Plows pushed slush into tidy piles. The river moved slow and dark under bridges. And inside a penthouse overlooking it all, Darius King watched his phone like it was supposed to apologize. It didn't. The temporary hold alert was still there, bright and stubborn. He refreshed the screen like a man trying to bully reality into changing. Tayana drifted through the kitchen in satin, humming like she couldn't hear the tension. A garment bag hung by the door with tomorrow's suit. The wedding planner's schedule was laid out on the island in color-coded blocks, each one assuming the world still obeyed him. Darius made his first call to the bank, then a second, then a third. Each time he got a different version of the same answer. Calm voices, polite phrases, no urgency in their tone. That was when he knew this wasn't a glitch. This was procedure, and procedure doesn't fear billionaires the way people do. Sir, we're verifying pathways connected to your operating entities, the representative repeated. It's routine. Routine. The most dangerous word in a man's life when he's built his power on exceptions. Darius ended the call and tried to move forward anyway. He told himself the wedding would happen, the photos would happen, the headlines would happen, and Monique would stay frozen somewhere out of frame, too embarrassed to show her face. That belief lasted until he stepped into the elevator and tapped his own access panel. A red light blinked. He tapped again. Red. For a second, he just stood there, staring, because he'd never seen a door say no to him without raising its voice. His driver, waiting behind him, cleared his throat like he didn't want to witness this. Tayana's heels clicked on marble as she came closer, phone already in her hand, pretending she wasn't listening. Darius swallowed the first wave of rage and did what men like him always do when control slips. He called a person he paid to restore it. His attorney answered on the second ring. Sterling? No, not that. Darius's lawyer was named Grant Maddox. Sharp suits, smooth voice, always 2 steps behind disaster. Grant, Darius said, quiet but edged. My access is down. My accounts are under review. Fix it. Grant didn't panic. He never did. We're handling it, he said. Stay calm. Stay calm was what people said when they didn't have an answer. Darius pressed harder. Why is compliance calling me? Why are they flagging my entities? A pause. Just long enough to be suspicious. Someone triggered a review, Grant said carefully. We're identifying the source. There it was, the first crack of real fear. Not in Darius's voice. In Grant's, hidden under professional restraint. Because reviews didn't appear out of nowhere. Reviews were activated. And someone had reached for a lever. Across town, Monique sat in a quiet hotel conference room with Calvin Brooks, a paper cup of tea cooling in front of her. She wasn't wearing silk. She wasn't humming. She was wearing a thick sweater and boots with salt stains at the edges, and her face had that calm set to it that comes when humiliation stops being an emotion and turns into a plan. Calvin had printed everything. The access revocation, the property management request, the timestamp trail, the texts. He laid them out in a row like dominoes. Then he placed one more document at the end, something he'd pulled overnight from filings most people never read. Monique, he said, this isn't just about a condo. He slid the page closer and tapped the line again. Your name isn't listed as a spouse here. It's listed as an authorized party connected to the holding group that controls a large portion of King's operational backbone. Monique didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised. She looked tired, like she'd been living with a truth she didn't want to use. My mother warned me, she said quietly. She told me never to argue with him when he gets reckless. She told me to keep records. Calvin watched her. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Because I didn't want to be that woman, Monique said. The one who has to prove she deserves to be treated like a human. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Darius, short and familiar, like he couldn't help repeating the same cruelty. You'll be fine. Monique stared at it for a full second, then screenshot it and placed it into the folder with everything else. Not because she needed it emotionally, because she needed it structurally. Patterns mattered. Repetition mattered. It showed intent. Then Calvin's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression shifted, tightening in a way that meant the arena had changed. Monique, he said, voice low, the wedding venue just called. They said there's an issue with the account on file, and they want to speak to the authorized party. Monique's hand settled over her belly. Her eyes stayed steady, because the room had just moved from private humiliation to public stage, and Darius King was walking into it, believing the spotlight was for him. By late afternoon, the snow had slowed to a quiet drift, the kind that made Chicago look polite again. But the city wasn't calm. It was watching. The wedding venue sat near the river, all glass walls and chandelier light. The sort of place where the valet line looks like a luxury car show and the lobby smells like roses and money. People arrived dressed for cameras, tailored coats, polished boots, diamonds that caught every flash of brightness. The guest list was stacked with donors, executives, socialites, and the kind of friends who only show up when they think a man is winning. Darius King stepped out of his SUV like he owned the sidewalk. He wore a black overcoat and a confident smile, already performing the story he wanted the city to repeat. Billionaire divorces the problem, marries the upgrade, moves on spotless. Tayana floated beside him in white, gloved and glowing, her hand on his arm like a claim. She kept whispering little jokes into his ear, the way people do when they think the room belongs to them. Inside, a coordinator with an earpiece approached, clipboard pressed to her chest. Her smile looked practiced, but her eyes were tight. "Mr. King," she said, "we need to verify something regarding the account." Darius didn't slow. "Talk to my planner." The coordinator didn't move out of the way. That was the first microbeat, the first tiny moment where power doesn't receive the automatic respect it expects. "It's urgent," she said. "We need the authorized party." Darius's smile held, but his jaw tightened. "I'm the authorized party." The coordinator glanced at her tablet. "Our records show a different name." Phones came out. Not openly, not dramatically, just subtle tilts and lifted hands. People love a spectacle most when they can pretend they didn't. Darius's attorney, Grant Maddox, pushed forward, voice smooth. "There's been a misunderstanding. We'll resolve it." The coordinator's finger slid across her screen. "We can't proceed until the hold is cleared." Hold. That word traveled fast through a rich crowd. You could see it happen. The whispers, the sideways glances, the couple near the bar leaning in, the groomsmen who stopped laughing mid-sentence. Darius lowered his voice. "Clear it." Grant pulled him a step aside. Compliance flagged one of the pathways. "They're asking for documentation." Darius's posture shifted. Not collapse, just the smallest change in stance, like a man adjusting his feet on ice. Across the lobby, the doors opened again, and cold air rolled in with someone the crowd didn't expect to see. Monique walked in with Calvin Brooks at her side, boots still dusted with salt, a dark wool coat buttoned high, her belly rounding the fabric in a way that made the room's silence feel louder. She didn't arrive like a threat. She arrived like a fact. A few guests recognized her and froze. Others didn't, but they sensed the energy shift and turned to look anyway. Witnesses made in real time. Darius spotted her, and his face flashed with something ugly. Shock, then anger, then the instinct to control the narrative before it controlled him. "You're really doing this?" he said, loud enough for nearby people to hear. "After everything? Monique, you'll be fine. You always are." There it was again. The repeatable cruelty. The line he liked because he thought it made him untouchable. Monique didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't even look at Tayana. She looked at the coordinator. "I'm the authorized party you asked for," Monique said, calm and clear. The coordinator blinked. "Yes, ma'am. Are you Monique King?" Monique nodded once. Grant's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, his professional calm cracked. "This is inappropriate," he snapped. "She has no standing here." Calvin stepped forward. "She is standing in your paperwork. And in your filings." The coordinator turned her tablet toward Monique. "We need your confirmation to proceed." The system flagged the controlling entity. "We were instructed not to release services without approval from the authorized party listed." Monique glanced at the screen, then at Darius. And this was the second twist, the deeper one. It wasn't just that Darius's accounts were under review. It was that the wedding itself, every deposit, every vendor contract, every last-minute payment, was routed through the same holding structure Darius had tried to use as a weapon. The same structure that listed Monique as the person who could say yes or no. Darius's voice dropped, suddenly sharp with panic. "Monique, don't." The crowd leaned in without moving. Silence became a stage. Monique didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She kept her voice level, the quiet flex of someone who doesn't need to perform power because she has it. "No," she said. One word. "Clean." Final. The coordinator's face went pale. Understood. She tapped her earpiece and spoke softly. Pause all services. Suspend entry. Do not proceed. It rolled outward like a wave. The florist stopped at the doorway with a crate of arrangements. The string quartet went quiet. A vendor at the back muttered, "Payment didn't clear." The valet line stalled as if the entire venue had hit a red light at once. Tayana's expression tightened, the first crack in her glow. Grant hurried away, phone pressed to his ear. Guests began backing up, not wanting to be caught too close to a man whose power was visibly failing. Darius turned, scanning faces that were already changing, already stepping back. His voice rose, but it didn't carry authority anymore. It carried desperation. "This is my wedding," he insisted. Monique watched him the way you watch someone learn too late. Then she delivered the moral crushing without lifting her chin. "You locked a pregnant woman out in the snow and thought the world would clap," Monique said, her tone steady enough to sting. "Now you get to stand in the cold you made." She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. The room was doing it for her. Whispers becoming conclusions. Phones becoming headlines. Donors quietly leaving. Allies suddenly busy. Monique turned and walked back toward the doors with Calvin, unhurried. Outside, snow drifted across the sidewalk like ash, and the city kept breathing. Behind her, Darius King stood under chandelier light that no longer belonged to him, watching his story collapse in real time. And the only thing he could hear, louder than the fountain, louder than the whispers, was the truth he'd tried to bury. Arrogance always leaves receipts.